Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm here with Freddie Johnson of the Conservation Burial Alliance. Freddie is one of the founders of the Conservation Burial Incorporated, the nonprofit organization that manages Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. He served as CBI's board president for 3 years prior to being CBI's executive director from 2011 to 2021. Freddie helped found the nonprofit Conservation Burial Alliance in 2016 and presently serves on the board of directors. Freddie has been deeply engaged with the home funeral and natural burial movement since 2006 and has given hundreds of presentations about burial and funerary history, caring for our own dead, and conservation burial grounds. So welcome, Freddie.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and just really happy to be connected with you and your program. Thanks.
You're very welcome. This is exciting for us because we really want to be able to introduce people to, the concept of conservation burial. It's a form of natural burial, but people need to understand the differences. So, we're really happy that you're here so you can, kind of guide us through that. So, for our viewers, Freddie, could you please explain the difference between a natural burial and a conservation burial? And more importantly, what makes a conservation burial unique, and important?
Sure, Ed. So a natural burial ground, and here we're talking about terms that for the most part are Green Burial Council terms, and they're pretty well standardly used now, but a conservation burial ground essentially is a dedicated cemetery or burial ground, and all they do is natural or green burial. And I think I like to say natural burial, but I could just as easily say green burial. They're one and the same, and all the standards and the practices are what most people know now, and that is not using vaults or embalming or all of the things that steel caskets, everything that really ends up costing a good bit of money and also is environmentally costly as well. So a conservation burial ground would do just that. Now there's a lot of leeway or broadness that a conservation burial ground could be in. I mean, it could do that in a pretty simple and conventional way, or it could go more towards what I'm about to explain of a conservation burial ground where one of the things that they prioritize is nature and making sure that they do some things for the land and to make it more of an ecosystem. However, when you go to a conservation burial ground, they're dedicated to, of course, only natural burial and everything a natural burial ground would do in that realm. But they also have this higher obligation and dedication, and this is one of the biggest differences, by definition, they have to have a conservation easement forever in perpetuity protecting the land. And generally the culture of conservation burial ground, it's sort of tied to the land conservation, like land trust and anything related to long-term land conservation, caring for the land management, but first and foremost, protecting that land, so that it is always going to be a living ecosystem. So conservation burial is dedicated to that. And they also are very much dedicated to having a certain amount of their revenue dedicated toward land management, making sure that there's restoration where needed, and making sure that the living ecosystem there is honored. So it really, if you look at it in terms of the, I guess, environmental factor, you've got all the benefits of natural burial that a conservation burial ground, dedicated conservation burial would have. And by the way, those are wonderful. It's not a matter of one being wrong or right or better than the other. It's just when you go to a conservation burial ground, you're adding on sort of the environmental benefits of probably more carbon sequestration, cleaning air, cleaning water, and whatever ecosystem that you have there or build there, it's going to be forever as a part of that conservation easement. I hope that's kind of long and drawn out,
No,
but I hope
no,
that gets the
no, it did answer it. Yeah, no, Freddie, it did answer it. So, I mean, for the viewers, really, when I think of conservation burial, like and Freddie had said, some of these terms are now kind of industry standard because of many years of us being involved in this. I think of accountability. I think of stewardship. I think of the ultimate goal of land, not only land management, but uh, protecting the land. So I think what you do really truly is a form of capturing these wild and scenic places so that they stay that way forever, and offering what we've always done in a natural environment. So I think you hit it there, Freddie, and I think that's what people need to know, and I think that's what makes your organization important. I mean, I always say this to people. The low hanging fruit would be what we would consider the hybrid model. Every cemetery could offer natural burial, and then the step up from that is a natural burial ground, which, like is similar to a conservation, but maybe privately owned and not stewarded by a conservation agency. But the real gold standard is the conservation. And what I always believed is, as the hybrid and the natural grow, that will foster the growth of conservation burial in the future. So I see a really bright future for what you folks are doing, even though at the moment maybe there's not an enormous amount of them, but it will grow over time, and I think that's great. Uh, Before getting into to the Conservation Burial Alliance, you were involved heavily with the Conservation Burial Movement and Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. Could you tell us a little bit of history of yourself as to how you progressed through this movement?
Well, certainly wasn't planned, as you've probably heard from a lot of those folks who are in the death care and natural burial movement. But I did way back in the telling my age, but back in the 90s, I actually was motivated, for some reason got motivated to do my end of life planning, a will and that sort of thing. And in that work, I ran across part of it was to answer the question is what the question was, what type of body disposition do you choose? And as you know, and this was in the 90s, so this is, at least for me, this was before internet. I mean, I was going to libraries, and doing research, but the choices I had was burial, and it didn't say any more than burial, of course. And then it said cremation. And so what I wanted very much back then was just to be my body to be taken to the forest. I was up always, kind of a nature guy, grew up in the woods in North Carolina, and that was dear to my heart. I just wanted simple, to the woods. And if I had to be buried, okay, but still just natural. So after a lot of work looking in libraries, I gave up and I checked, as you would expect, I checked cremation. Why? Because less money and it's less environmentally impactful than the other choice that I had. And if you fast forward to like 15 years later, I was at a potluck, actually a vegetarian potluck, and one of my friends, often at the potlucks, somebody would give a presentation about something they recently learned about. And my friend Larry gave a presentation on his visit to the first natural burial ground in Florida, which is in the Panhandle. And it was a farmer who started, he wanted to protect his land, and he was all about natural burial. So he started the first natural burial ground in Florida. And when I heard about there was such thing as that, and Larry, my friend, also went on to talk about Ramsey Creek in South Carolina, and that was the first conservation burial ground, as you know, Ed and Billy and Kimberly Campbell. And so as I learned this information, I could feel electric currents going up and down my back. And I couldn't wait for Larry to get through so I could grab him and say, because I was going back 15 years when I was all trying to figure out that choice. And I said, Larry, this is something we have to have in our community. We live in Alachua County, Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida is here. It's a very progressive community. So I already was pretty confident that it would be a successful effort. And then Larry and I went to my friend who was the head of Alachua Conservation Trust, the local land trust, which is fabulous. And my friend Hutch there, Larry and I sat down with him, we explained it. He said, I know exactly what this is, and I'm on board for this, and let's work toward getting Alachua Conservation Trust. As long as you guys, and I'll help you start a nonprofit, we can most likely work together to make this happen. And that's how we got going. Yeah.
And it's amazing because I hear it every day, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times as well. This movement really truly has started with people like yourself who had an idea and became motivated, and passionate about it, as it started to formulate. And there's many people in the industry that are in our business, but so many of the leaders in the natural movement are just like layman, who said, "Hey, this really sounds like it's something great to do." So it's a great story, and I think I would probably know this next question, the answer to this, but the viewers probably would like to know, because I do know a lot of the people that are part of your organization, but people might want to know when was the Conservation Burial Alliance formed, and what was the great inspiration, to create that organization?
Sure. Well, after several years of being in the operation of Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery, I was getting little tidbits of information about we were the fourth certified conservation burial ground in the U.S. And within like 3 or 4 years of operating, actually it was more like 5 or 6 years of operating, it became obvious to me I could go on the internet and find every conservation burial ground in the US, and there was about 9 or 10. And since we were doing something that and we had a communication with Billy and Kimberly, and they helped us in the beginning some. But they're in South Carolina and we're in Florida. A different situation. We had different rules in terms of laws than they had. So we were trying to figure all this out our own, and we were doing a good job. But it was one of those situations where I could feel the need for collaboration. I saw what was happening with the conservation burial movement, that it needed collaboration. Well, that we were all just working like crazy, busy, but we're in our own little pods and not having any kind of communication. So I spoke to some of the staff and volunteers at Prairie Creek, and I just said, seems like a reasonable thing to do. What do you think about starting an alliance of collaboration and awareness about conservation burial? And they were totally in on doing that. So we identified and confirmed one, like I said, I can't remember if it was 9 or 10, but we confirmed them, and I sent out an email to every one of them asking if they would have an interest in formulating a nonprofit where we collaborated, worked together, and learned from each other, while also having some kind of hub to further the awareness and understanding of what conservation burial was all about to the public. And out of all of those, either 9 or 10, all but one gave a very quick and positive response, like, "Oh my gosh, yes." And so we all got together, and the one that didn't is kind of understandable. They are their sort of own entity that's a part of a monastery. So, they're kind of doing their own thing, and they like it that way, and they do a great job. So, but anyway, the next step for us, after having phone conversations, emails, and starting to do some basic collaboration, is we had somewhere around 2018, we had a in physical what would you call that? A conference between us in Asheville, North Carolina, and there was a conservation burial ground there called, it's still there, Carolina Memorial, I believe it is. And it was wonderful. We had like folks, Jody Bueller from White Eagle was there, and Billy and Kimberly, and even all of these different early on conservation burial grounds. And Lee Webster joined us with us, who I'm sure you're familiar of. She's like involved in the whole new death care movement, natural death care movement, including conservation burial and natural burial. But it was a huge success. We've had like a couple other conferences in physical, but we also meet. And one of the things, going back to the explanation about conservation burial, one of the things that the Conservation Burial Alliance, one of their kind of mantras is that conservation burial at its core, it's about the creation and support of multidimensional social and ecological spaces that sustain us as they sustain the planet and those that dwell on the planet. And as we got to know each other, we realized how very much the things that mattered, we did the same, but we were very, very different. And we all had different, based on our situations of how we started. There's just a very broad way, and I'm sure it's the same for conservation burial grounds, and even hybrids. You know, you don't have to have a cookie cutter method here. You've got plenty of room to do things relative to what the culture of those organizations that started and the community. But at Prairie Creek, it was very much when myself and others got going with the Conservation Burial Alliance, it was distinctly apparent how much difference it made for us in having confidence in learning and sharing. So it definitely has advantages. That organization has advantages for operations and for the public as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, it takes a village, and like you had mentioned, you know, all of you were, even though you were in different regional locations, you were experiencing probably very similar circumstances. And why reinvent the wheel? I mean, so everyone can then help foster
Right.
and create, you know, an easier path. Because
Yes.
some of us have walked a really rough road, you know, and we'd rather
Yep.
pave it for others. And I think that's wonderful. And you know, when it comes to the Conservation Burial Alliance, if someone's interested, I mean, are there any types of outreach and education that the Alliance could offer or assistance for some like a would-be conservation burial organization?
Yes, we have we have fairly regular scheduled Zoom meetings, and we have one that's called the it's like an operational webinar, I guess, for lack of a better word. And these are for operating facilities where it's all about collaboration, asking questions, and it's a Zoom meeting. You know, we might have 6 or 7 people. By the way, there's now, you know, Conservation Burial Alliance, we have like probably we have different kind of memberships. Probably we have around over 100 memberships of different kinds, but we have probably, if you count the conservation burial grounds that are starting, plus the ones that are operating, it's very near 40 across the US now. And whereas that might not sound like much, remember when we first started, there was only like 9 or 10. And it's a bigger hurdle to start a conservation burial ground because you've got to typically you have a land trust partner in some way or another for that conservation easement. But at any rate, I forgot if you asked me another question.
Well, no. You answered it about the education and outreach. If you know that explains it, meaning that you're growing and you're helping others create these spaces. And Freddie, and for the audience, it's an enormous feat, to partner with an organization like that. It's not, so I commend the fact that you're growing. To me, that sounds like you're growing really at a fast pace, meaning that, to find these partners, to create these partnerships, it's not easy. And the more people that are involved, a lot of times the more difficult it becomes. So it sounds to me like you're doing something great over there. And I know that, you have your providers. A lot of people would say, is conservation burial offered in all 50 states? And if not, which ones? But before I would have you answer that, I think it's more important for people to understand, what that conservation easement means, what makes that different from another, cemetery, let's say, because that's really the definition in many ways of what you're doing. So, is it offered in all 50 states? And could you just explain to the viewers a little bit about the importance of that easement and why that gives you the ability to say, it's a conservation burial ground?
Sure. Well, as to the question whether it's in all the states, unfortunately, I can't give you an accurate answer on that. I would say no, that it's probably not, simply because I only know of like around and ballpark, even if I count the ones starting up, it's probably in the 40s. And since we have
Right.
50 states, probably not. But in a lot of conservation burial grounds, like if you look at North Carolina, if you look at Florida, a lot of them have multiple conservation burial grounds where others do not. But I would say, you may know this, Ed, but I would say if you look at conservation burial grounds, not conservation burial grounds, but if you look at natural burial grounds, I would say now probably that it's pretty close to in every all states. And the other thing that sometimes happens, which is also very nice, is startups will start they might be looking for a land trust partner to create a conservation easement, and they want to be a conservation burial ground, but they also want to get started. So what I'm seeing sometimes, even with our members, is they're starting out as natural burial grounds, but their whole plan is based on growing into and becoming a conservation burial ground. So what else did you ask me, Ed? There was more to your question.
I think it was the easement portion of
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the thing about the conservation easement is you can think of cemeteries, I think of cemeteries as having kind of three layers of protection. And that first layer is just being a cemetery. Because supposedly, if you have a cemetery where people have in families are still living and their loved ones are buried there, then that's a level of protection. But it's been shown and very well all over that that's not a very high bar of protection, because we have buildings and communities built on what used to be cemeteries. So the second level of protection for conservation burial grounds is that partner, as a land trust partner, and just the fact that typically it's a large piece of land that has conservation value, and the people that are involved, in our case, the conservation, we have a land trust involved, but the people that actually hold the conservation easement is the county. It's the county's environmental program. So that's kind of like another, without the easement, even having a partner like a land trust and having a partner, the county, and their commitment to what your plan and your mission is, that's a whole nother layer of protection right there. But then legally, once you have that conservation easement, that is a forever thing, and it spells out, they're not all the same. You can work them out to where the parties are agreeable of what's restricted and what's not, but all of them are in perpetuity to protect that land. And in the case of Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery, it was pretty clear that if Alachua Conservation Trust didn't go in and save this land, that it was going to be, and this was like beautiful land that's adjacent to 20,000+ acres of a state park. And this is adding on another 600 acres. Now, Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery is only 93 of that 600, but that conservation easement is giving the highest level of protection that you can possibly have.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you explaining that the way you did, because what people do need to understand, and I say this all the time, is a buyer beware type of situation, meaning that by you explaining the transparency of the process, sometimes people are under the illusion, that, oh, it's a green burial ground, but if it's not protected properly, like, people can change it, and that
Right.
would be a problem, and that would be a disservice not only to our families but to the environment and everything else that we do. So that really is a great thing for you to explain to these consumers and to these viewers, is the fact that when you hear this, now you have a little bit of education when it comes to it, and ask the questions and see the documents and understand exactly what is protected and what is not protected. Uh, at Prairie Creek and within the movement itself, I'd have to ask you, you know, uh, are you seeing? Let's use 5 years, because I feel like this movement has really changed since COVID drastically. It's grown. Uh, but have you seen, at Prairie Creek and at the Conservation Burial Alliance, have you seen what you would say an increased interest in conservation burial specifically? Have you seen an uptick, Freddie?
Yes, yes, yeah, it's been pretty remarkable. I mean, we actually did a sort of a open operation, because one of our dear environmental friends and local doctor lady came to us and said, "Look, you guys are about ready to open. I don't know how close you are, but you need to open, because I have a lethal brain tumor and I've got about 2 months." And this lady has done tons of conservation, land, saving land, and all kind of environmental work. Plus, she was just a remarkable medical doctor, dear friend. So we had to jump on it and open really quickly, because she was set on being the first person buried there, and she was. It was very beautiful, but that was in 2010. Well, that year we might have done, a burial every other month or something. And then the next year we probably did 1 to 3 burials a month. Well, now it's just been a steady progression. Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery does 100 burials per year now. So we're doing like 8 or 10 a month. And very, very busy. And we've buried like over 1,000 people, and we also have well over 1,000 folks that have plans to be buried there. So we went in this short 14 or 15 years, we went from, thinking in terms of getting 100 or so burials to now we're on our way towards 3,000, if you count both folks that are buried and that plan to be buried. In fact, we're just starting to look to save more land because you've got to stay ahead of the curve. And our commitment is Conservation Burial Inc., our nonprofit's a 501c13 that runs Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. And our mission is to keep this going. It's not one cemetery. It's like we're in it to build the movement because it's such a great thing for people and for the planet. It has so many benefits. Yeah.
No, absolutely, Freddie, and congratulations on that success. And I certainly can understand that, because I started back in 2007, and we were barely crawling. Then we started to walk, and now we're starting to run. And I think that's what's most exciting about all of that. Uh, so this brings me to we're getting to the end of the interview, and I always save this for the last question, because I think it's the most fun. So where would you like to envision the Conservation Alliance and conservation burial movement in general, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years? If you had your druthers, what would you like to see?
Well, in terms of Conservation Burial Alliance, I think, right now, one of the things that is a challenge for us is what I mentioned to you earlier. Virtually all the people that are involved with Conservation Burial Alliance are very, very busy people with their own operation somewhere, in some state and doing what we do. However, the biggest benefit that sort of has organically grown out of Conservation Burial Alliance is it's proved itself to be, as we suspected, but maybe even more than we suspected, is it to be this collaboration of having these, for new upstarts who haven't opened yet, but they're starting to have these Zoom meetings on a regular basis, to have also the operators Zoom webinar, webcast, or whatever you want to call it, because it's kind of like self-evolving. It just keeps going. And where I would like in 5 years for Conservation Burial Alliance and the movement to be is for there to be more awareness in the public and understand it's not an easy, to have an elevator speech and to explain to someone about conservation burial is almost impossible, because it always goes in the brain and comes out eventually as, oh, it's just green burial. And green burial is wonderful. I'm all about that movement as well, but it's happening. As you said, it's happening. So, but the conservation burial aspect of it, I think in 5 years, if Conservation Burial Alliance can find a way, 3 programs like you're doing, maybe starting to get working on a grant, it's the awareness thing and explaining all of how many benefits there are associated with conservation burial as that entity. It's pretty remarkable. I guess
No,
that's it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I do see that. I truly do. I mean, you guys are doing great work. Like I said, I know many of your associates, from being in this business for as long as I've been in it. And I've always appreciated the fact that, that people were taking it to the next level, a higher level. Because for me, what's absolutely most important above anything and all is the rights of my families, to protect them, and then of course the environment we live in, and whether it be repurposing something that already exists for a new life or a new chapter, or taking something and protecting it like your organization does forever. It's a win-win. No matter what you do, you can't find anything wrong with any of it, which is very rare in life. So I want to thank you for joining us today, Freddie. Our viewers can learn more by visiting conservationburialalliance.org, and please do support the cause. So thanks, Freddie. We really appreciate it here at the Global Green Burial Alliance.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you guys very much. And thank you again for having us. I hope that you keep growing and growing, and I'm going to keep watching and watching.
Well, thanks, Freddie. All right, everybody. See you at the next one.